Let's go JavaScripting! Hi everybody and welcome to another exciting edition of Boring JavaScript. I'm your host, the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and today we're going to be doing something really fun. We're going to be doing web animation. So what is web animation? Well, you're probably familiar with all those animate type tags you can put inside CSS to animate your DOM elements on the screen. Web animation takes that entire concept and puts it into JavaScript so that you can now do dynamic animations. Want to see how it works? Let's get started. So what are we going to do for this animation? Well, it's going to be a very simple animation to kind of show you the very key concepts of doing it in JavaScript. I have a picture of a cat, and when I click on Go, it's going to move the cat. And when I click on Reset, it's going to take the cat back to the very beginning. So watch. Here we go. Go! And there goes the cat to the right-hand side of the screen. And when I click on Reset, it goes back to the very beginning. So let me show you how that looks in CSS. Now, I'm not going to teach you all about CSS here. I mean, this is a JavaScript course, but trust me on here. Basically, here is all the animations I have for animating the cat within CSS. The big thing here is that when the cat has a MoveMe class applied to it, I'm going to say, hey, do an animation that's going to use the keyframes called Move the Cat, which I'll show you here in a minute. Do it within 3 seconds and do a linear distribution of the keyframes as they go along. And then I'm going to have an animation fill mode here basically called forwards that basically says, okay, once the animation is finished, whatever settings are within the cat, keep them. So what are the keyframes? This move the cat, well, this is defined down here. And this basically says, you know, what's going to happen at the very beginning of the cat animation, at the very end of the cat animation, and also with keyframes, anything I wanted in between. So for example, I'm saying here, at the beginning, I want it to start with a margin left of 0, and at the end, I want it to end with a margin left of 40. So what will happen when I click on the Go button, let's go to our JavaScript here. When I click on the Go button, it's going to add the MoveMe class to it. So when the MoveMe class gets added, it's going to start the animation using the MoveCat keyframes over 3 seconds. It's going to say, okay, I'm going to start with margin left of 0, and then I'm going to calculate over a linear distribution here what it will take to get it to a margin left of 40 at the end of 3 seconds. And so it will do all the animations for you automatically. And this works great. CSS works great for this. One problem is here, it's kind of difficult to get the dynamic animations in there. For instance, what if I wanted to make the cat move faster, for example, or slower? It can be done, but it takes a little bit of jumping around. So what the JavaScript gurus got around to doing was figure out, hey, you know, if we can move all this into JavaScript, we can have it as dynamic as possible. And that's what web animation is all about. So let me show you what that looks like next. So how do we do this within JavaScript? Well, it's by using the animation object, and it's very easy to grab an animation object and do all sorts of fun things with it. So let me show you how to exactly copy this CSS animation into JavaScript. So let's flip over to our JavaScript file and let's start copying some code over. First of all, I'm going to need to be able to save the animation for later on, so I'm going to have a variable called cat animation. And let's throw in 2 other pieces of information for that. Now the idea here of these 2 variables is to basically exactly emulate what we have defined within the CSS. Let's take a look at the keyframes first. Now the keyframes, if you go over to the CSS, it kind of looks like an array there, don't you think? I mean, here we got obviously the declaration of the CSS declaration, but then we have just a listing of different breakpoints within the keyframes. I mean, for instance, I wanted something 25% through, I would have said 25%. If I wanted something happen 75% through the animation, I would have said 75% there, or, you know, just adding one after another. So you kind of think of those as arrays. Well, guess what? In JavaScript, you're going to pass it as an array. And in each object within the array, or each element within an array is an object that defines what you're going to be changing and then some other parameters. In this particular case, I'm using the offset parameter to be able to, or property to be able to say, okay, I want this particular object to start at 0. So if I wanted, for example, something at 25%, I would have had an offset of 0.25, or something at 75%, I would set offset 0.75. Obviously, offset 1 is at the very end of the keyframes. So obviously you've got to have a 0 and you've got to have a 1 no matter what. And if you just have two elements in there, it's going to assume the first one is 0 and the last one is 1. What are we going to change? Well, we're going to change margin left. We're going to start with margin left to 0, and then we're going to go to margin left of 40 rem, which copies exactly what we've got here. So that's how you define the keyframes. Well, what about this part here? Well, that's real easy too. These are some animation parameters that we're going to pass to it. Here's the duration, 3,000 milliseconds. In web animation, it's in milliseconds. Well, that will cover the 3 seconds here in CSS. The easing is going to be linear. That covers the linear part of the animation there. And then finally, the fill will be the forwards, and that covers the forwards fill mode right there. So as you can tell now, we've got the animation parameters here, we got the keyframe parameters here. Let's put it all together. So really, really, really simple. Let's throw that into move the cat. And I'm going to comment out this because we don't need it anymore, but I'm keeping it there just to kind of show you the difference between the two. Here it is. This is all you need to do. There is now an animate method on each element that is popped inside the DOM. This animate element takes 2 arguments. The first argument are the keyframes, which exactly corresponds to the keyframes in CSS. And the second argument is the animation parameters, which I've called timing here, which exactly corresponds with everything there. And that now gets everything tied together, and that gets saved into a web animation object, which I'm calling cat animation. That's the variable I created earlier. Once this occurs, once you do the animate, that basically does the exact same thing as our CSS here as adding the move me class. That starts off the animation and lets it go. So for 3 seconds later, it will stop the cat, well, start the cat at the beginning, and then 3 seconds later, stop the cat at the very end. Well, how about stopping it? Well, that's easy enough to do too. So let's go to my code I've got down here. Let's copy it to reset cat. And again, I'm going to just comment out the old line so so you can see it still, so you can have just a reference there. And as you can tell here, we're not using CSS at all anymore. No more move me. So I'm just doing, make sure that somebody hasn't clicked on cancel with cat animation hasn't been defined. And if it has been defined, I cancel the animation, which basically resets everything back to the very beginning without any of the keyframes here applied to the element. Now, what's wonderful about this is you can do a whole bunch of different things with it. You can do, there's a play option, there's a pause option, there's a finish option which automatically skips it to the very end. So you can have an animation that is running and you can have controls there to actually stop and start or restart the animation. So it's wonderful what you can do, and those are the kind of things with CSS you can't do. Once you start with CSS, it just goes, and then you have to have JavaScript to be able to try to figure out how to to remove the class to stop it and all that. So that should be all that we really need. That will allow us to be able to click the cat and reset the cat. So this should work exactly the same way as everything else. So let's find out. Let's go over to our boring JavaScript screen here. Let's do a Control F5 and do a complete reload. And let's click on go, and there goes the cat. Da-da-da-da! And if we click on reset, it goes back to the very beginning. So no change in what we did with CSS, but now we have it inside JavaScript. So remember earlier I said that in JavaScript, this allows you now to be able to dynamically set everything where we couldn't with the CSS. So how do you do that? That's next. So how do you do dynamic values within a web animation? Incredibly easy. Let me show you what I've got here. I've got the old program here, but I've added a slider down at the bottom of the screen here that allows me to change the speed. Right now it's at 3 seconds, but I could change it to say 2.5 seconds, and when I click on go, it does it in 2.5 seconds. Of course, you really can't tell there because 2.5 seconds to 5 seconds to 3 seconds is a little low. So let's get all the way down to 0.25 seconds. How about that? We click on go and zoom, there goes our little kitty cat. So by any time I change the value of this slider, not only do I change the number here at the end, but this allows me to also change the speed of the cat as it goes from left to right, showing you that I am now able to dynamically change the speed of the cat. How did I do that? Oh, it's so simple. Let's just take a quick look. Let's go to my HTML first. Here's my input range. It's a type of range, my slider. It's got a minimum value of 0.25, maximum of 3, value of 3 instead of 0.25, la-da-da-da-da-da, doesn't really matter. Let's go to the JavaScript and see how that works. All right, not much has changed on any of here, but one important thing has changed. First of all, I've got a input event listener for the range or for the slider. Basically, the input listener says, I want you to fire this event anytime this particular input changes. You know, for example, if you type something within an input field, for example, in this particular case, anytime I slide that slider, I'm going to get this event. What happens with this event? Well, first of all, it changes the text next to the slider. But the important thing is it changes the duration property of the timing variable. Now, why is that important? Well, because the timing variable decides how long I'm going to let the cat run. And so every time I click on the go button and I get to the cat animation here, it's going to say, okay, here are my keyframes, here's my timing. Oh, we got a new timing here of 250 milliseconds. Let's zip that cat all along. And that's it. There really is nothing else to it. So as you can tell, it's really, really simple to be able to, in this particular case, change the duration time of the kitty cat. And so I can just have fun all day long, change this kitty cat from 3 seconds, I'll just reset it there, all the way to 0.25 seconds. No problem. So that's why web animation is so wonderful. It allows you to take your basic animations that you have in CSS, those wonderful animations you have in CSS, codify them in the JavaScript, and by doing so, make them dynamic. And that's all there is for web animation. I hope you enjoyed our video. Hope I didn't bore you to death. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, you can see all of our videos at www.boringjavascript.com or see everything we have at www.thevirtualoid.com. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later.